Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video I'm going to be building a kit that I've been after for ages. The Airfix 176 scale Chieftain tank. The Chieftain is one of my favourite Cold War tanks. I built one of these kits up as a kid, but being a fairly old kit now, they're quite hard to get hold of these days. I'm very happy I've managed to find one, still in its cellophane wrap, even if it's a little dusty. In the box you get memories. Seriously, opening this lid's taking me back. The kit comes with blue and white instructions, the parts to build the kit, a small sheet of decals, rubber band tracks, and this little ad for the Modelers Club. I haven't seen one of these slips of paper in years. The vintage classic kits are missing a trick. They should reprint these and just add the new information onto them. A first quick look at the sprues show that for a dated kit, the detail's actually quite crisp. I'm seeing a lot of details I recognise from bigger Tamiya Chieftains I've built more recently. This box version dates back to 1978, older than me, so it's about 40 at the time of making this kit. It all looks pretty standard for its age. There's numbers on the parts, a bit of flash, and feed ports that will need to be cleaned up. I think the last version of this kit I made was a 1990 re-release. Anyway, onto the build. First thing on the menu is the side bits and suspension. Off screen I've cleaned off all the flash, but there wasn't much to sort out on these bits. Adding the suspension housing to the sides is simple and straightforward, but adding the track rollers is a bit delicate. With all the bits on the side, this is how it's looking. I'm going to leave this to dry for a bit so it's safer to handle. Now it's on to adding the wheels to the side bits. The cleanup here was easy but took ages as there were so many attachment points to clean off the wheels. Adding the wheels is simple and straightforward though. Despite feeling a little delicate, the fit's actually pretty good for an older kit. This is how the two side pieces are looking with all the wheels added to them. Then it's on to building the main hull of the Chieftain. The top of the hull's fairly simple and straightforward to build up. When you're adding the plate to the upper hull, make sure these bits are facing outwards as you'll need them to line up onto the side bits later on. Now it's time to build the lower part of the hull. The fit here is a bit of a nightmare. It's pretty obvious where everything wants to go, but getting it there, and all lined up, is a bit tricky. I'm not sure what to suggest here if you're building one at home, other than slow and steady wins the race. With some shuffling, the parts do go together eventually. Just don't use too much glue and be gentle with it at this stage, as it's very delicate. This is how it's looking with it all together. I'm going to leave this to dry overnight now so it's safer to handle tomorrow. The following day, with it properly dry, it's onto the details at the front of the tank. The parts here go on easily, but a lot of the bits are really small and will be easier to add using tweezers rather than fingers. The level of detail on this old kit is quite good. I'm aware it's not all on this kit, but most of it's here, and I think they get some points for that. This is how the front of the tank's looking, with the details added. Now it's on to adding details to the rear of the tank. Again, the parts go on nice and easily. Some of the bigger boxes had quite a bit of flash on them that needed to be cleaned up though. But other than that, this step was simple and straightforward. With these bits on though, other than the side skirts, that's the lower hull finished. Next up, it's time to build the turret. Firstly, I'm constructing the main turret pieces. The way this kit goes together, there is a nasty seam line between the two halves of the turret. I'm going to need to clean that up, but in order to do a good job of it, I'll need to leave it to dry first. Once it's dry, it's just a case of wet sanding this area back level. This took quite a bit of sanding to get the two pieces to looking flush. Once I finished sanding, I washed this part off under the tap as it was covered in dust and plastic paste. This is how the seams are looking after a sand. Now it's time to add some details to the turret. I'm starting off by adding all the little details to the top panel, as I get the feeling adding them now will be easier than adding them later. The fits on all these parts is pretty good, but the parts are very small and delicate. The spotlight though is just place on, which isn't great. With all the little bits on the top piece, it's time to add it to the turret. Again, like the hull, the fit between these parts is not the greatest. The turret top piece and back piece need a light shuffling to get them all in the right place. Next, it's on to adding the spotlights and smoke launchers to the turret. The spotlight goes together well, but the fit's quite tight and it needs a good squeeze to get the two parts together. Finally, it's on to adding the last details to the tank. All these last bits thankfully go on nice and easy. Here, you are meant to add some jerry cans to the turret as well, but I'm going to leave them off so I can paint them separately later. With the spool and what I think is an air filter system in place, all that's left to add is the side skirts. And with them on, that completes the build of this model. Now it's onto the painting. Same old here. I'm giving the tank a pre-coat of Humbrol Rattle Can 155. As always, I'm doing this off screen, outside, to avoid fumigating myself. This is how the tank's looking with the base coat down. Sadly, the paint can ran out right at the end of painting, and I missed giving the end of the barrel a coat. Most of this will be painted khaki though, and the very end will be black, so yeah, it's no drama. Now it's onto the camo. First, I attempted to use some Tamiya black green to do this bit. Unfortunately though, I think I might have watered this paint down at some point, or it's actually a mix for something long forgotten, as it's drying really light. Scrapping using the dark green, I go over the camo stripes with some Vallejo matte black. This is how it's looking with the camo down. You've got to love that Cold War classic camo pattern. Now it's onto the gun breech. Here I paint the shroud with some AK World War I khaki. Next it's time to give the tank its first wash. For this I'm using watered down matte black with a little bit of brown. I'm doing it this way on this tank as some of the camo is black, and hopefully adding brown will make the black look a bit more dirty. Now it's time to add the decals. I was quite surprised when the decals actually worked in this kit considering their age. They go on okay. Some seem a little bit big, there's a little bit of carrier film on them, but yeah, there aren't many markings for this tank, and most of the decals go on the rear end of the tank. Though they are few in number, that extra bit of detail makes a nice focal point on the model and really helps bring it to life. This is how the model's looking with the decals on. Next, it's time to add the dust coat. For this I'm using my normal Army Painter skeleton bone, but on this model I'm applying the dry brush extremely lightly as I don't want the contrast to be too great on the dark parts of the camo. This is how it's looking with the dry brush done. Now it's time to paint the tracks. Off screen I've given the tracks a base coat of matte black. First thing I'm doing here is giving them a quick dry brush with Army Painter gunmetal. With the gunmetal on, I'm revisiting the centre of the tracks with matte black, as these bits are rubber inserts for driving the tank on roads. With that dry, I hit the tracks with a coat of Vallejo European Earth pigment powder. Once that's on, I fix it in place with some hairspray before giving it a second light dusting of pigment powder again to make the pigment areas matte, otherwise they'll be shiny because hairspray dries gloss. Now it's time to add the tracks to the tank. Here I'm just tucking and gluing the tracks up under the fenders. I find for most of these smaller tanks doing this is much faster and easier and less of a headache than attempting to weld them. With the tracks on the tank, I give the whole tank a very light dusting of pigment powder to blend everything together. With the pigment powders down, I give the tank a focused hit of BS Dark Earth to give the tank some mud effects. In the vein of trying new things, I added the BS Dark Earth to the tank using a brush first and then used a sponge to take the sharp edges off the muck and give it a bit more of a random effect. Lastly, I hit all of the periscope glass with a bit of Army Painter Deep Blue, just to give these bits a bit of detail. And I think with the glass painted, I'm going to call this model done. This is the finished model. I think I did better than the last time I painted one of these about 25 years ago. This model was almost like painting something from a time capsule, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed making this kit. In conclusion, the Airfix 176 scale Chieftain tank is a nice model kit, and one that I would love to see re-released under the Vintage Classics line. Though it's an older kit and not as detailed as some of the newer models available, the kit goes together fairly well. If you're building one of these at home, you'll want to take your time when putting the main, lower hull and turret pieces together, as the fit's not the greatest or strongest here, but the parts do go together in the end with a little bit of reshuffling. Like with all of the old small scale Airfix kits, the tracks are also not the greatest in this. Cleanup wise, there is a bit of flash to get rid of on this kit, but no feed ports that get in the way of placing parts. Some bits in this kit would be easier to place on with tweezers though, and I'd consider this kit suitable for an advanced beginner to intermediate modeller because of that. This model cost me £14 to buy second hand. Considering the age of this kit and its slight rarity, I think that's a fair price for this time capsule build. However, if it was re-released under the Classics line, I'd consider this kit good value for between £10 and £12, as it's quite an in-depth kit. Anyway, that was my build and review of the Airfix 176 scale Chieftain tank. As always, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future content. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.